Welcome back to TFT Central. Today we're going to be taking a look at the MSI MAG 323 UPF monitor. It's a 32-inch size screen with a 4K resolution and a 160Hz refresh rate. This model is built around an AU Optronics Rapid IPS technology panel. Its headline specs are its 3840 by 2160 4K resolution and its 160Hz refresh rate. So that's going to provide you a high pixel density for sharp, crisp images, backed by a decent refresh rate for gaming, which is the general limit right now for a refresh rate for a 4K screen, other than a couple of exceptions where this can be pushed up to 240Hz. That 4K resolution is really great on a screen this size because it gives you more desktop area to work with if you use the common 125% OS scaling. And so that gives you more space than a common 1440p monitor. It also gives you a higher pixel density with really sharp images and excellent picture clarity, which is great for a wide range of tasks, whether that's for general office and productivity uses or for gaming and movies. The IPS panel also offers all the usual all-round strong performance from this technology, with a stable and reliable image, wide viewing angles and good colours as well. From a gaming point of view, the combination of 4K with 160Hz refresh rate is going to be challenging to run for many systems, but it's supported by adaptive sync for variable refresh rates, or VRR, with the screen also being certified under AMD's FreeSync Premium Pro scheme, so that should give you some reassurance around VRR performance. It's got a decent range of connectivity options too, with DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports and USB Type-C connection, which makes it an attractive option for both PC and console gaming. You can also use the picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture modes if you want to handle multiple inputs on the screen as well at once. We confirmed as well that the HDMI 2.1 ports support 4K 120Hz console gaming fully, along with VRR support, which is available from the Xbox Series X at least that we tested. We don't have a PS5 to confirm support for VRR on that console, but we do expect it to work okay. Another useful addition is that the screen supports HDMI CEC once you enable it from the on-screen menu. So that means that when you turn on your console, it will auto switch over to the relevant input, which is a handy and often overlooked feature. The addition of a USB Type-C port is also useful for single cable connectivity from laptops and other supported devices, and that supports DisplayPort Alt mode, as well as 90 watts power delivery. There are a few other extra features which include KVM support for controlling two systems from a single keyboard and mouse setup, 3 USB data ports and a headphone connection. It's pretty versatile for a wide range of uses, not just for gaming. The design is fairly simple and not too gamery, so for those who like a more modest appearance without all that RGB lighting and so on, it provides an interesting option. The stand provides a decent range of easy-to-use adjustments for tilt, height and swivel as well. If you're looking to buy a new gaming screen but you don't really know where to start with all this stuff, do check out our guide linked in the description below and above, which will take you through our top 3 gaming monitor buying considerations that you need to think about. It's also got a good rundown of MSI's other gaming monitor lineup in case you want something else that they might have to offer. The screen comes out of the box in its Eco preset mode, which is designed to help reduce power consumption by capping the brightness somewhat. It operates with the screen's full native colour space as well in this mode, which gives you that wide colour gamut. We measured a generally nice and accurate overall setup in this mode. Gamma was a bit high, as you can see from the graph on the left, with an average 2.31 gamma measured, compared with our target of 2.2. There's actually no gamma settings in the on-screen display menu at all, so to make any other adjustments or corrections, you'd need to be able to calibrate the screen yourself, or perhaps try our recommended settings and ICC profile that are linked in the description below. The balance of the red, blue and green channels was very good though, as shown in the middle graph here, resulting in a reliable grayscale colour temperature basically spot on to our 6500K target, and a white point that was only slightly too warm by 2% at 6349K. This led to an accurate grayscale overall with a Delta E 1.5 average, as shown on the right hand graph. Running in the Eco mode and at a default 70% brightness, we measured a luminance of 194 nits. This can be adjusted between 429 and 131 nits by changing the brightness control in the menu. If you move out of the Eco mode and into the user preset mode, for instance, the brightness can be controlled a bit higher, up to 468 nits and down to 130 nits minimum. It gives you a slightly wider range at that upper end instead, but it is still quite restrictive for anyone who wants to use the screen in more dimly lit rooms or a darker room environment. It's not able to even reach down to our typical 120 nits that we use for calibration, and so we would really have liked to have seen a better adjustment range from MSI at the bottom end of the scale here. Being an IPS panel, the contrast is only 955 to 1, although that's very close to the spec of 1000 to 1, but it's obviously not going to compete with VA or OLED technology panels. You also get that familiar IPS glow-on-dark content when you view it from an angle as well, so be wary of that. The left-hand diagram here shows the monitor's colour space represented by the white triangle compared with the sRGB reference colour space. Since it's a wide gamut screen, the colour space extends a considerable way beyond sRGB, which results in a 126.9% relative coverage. The accuracy of sRGB colours is therefore only what we'd call moderate, impacted by the oversaturation caused by that wide gamut panel, which is of course typical for all wide gamut monitors anyway. If we compare the screen against some other specific wide colour spaces, you can see that the screen actually quite closely matches the DCI P3 reference space, with 95.5% absolute coverage measured, and only some minor over coverage extension taking it to 101.2% relative coverage. DCI P3 is the colour space typically used for HDR content, and if we measure the colour accuracy for DCI P3, the results are good with a Delta E 2.3 average measured. MSI also provide an sRGB emulation mode from the screen where the wide gamut is then clamped back to the sRGB or SDR reference colour space. This mode does have some limitations though, unfortunately, as there are limited user controls left available in the on-screen menu now. You still have access to adjust the brightness thankfully, but there's no control over gamma, colour temperature or the RGB channels at all in this mode. We found the gamma in this mode to be a bit too low, measured at 2.04 average, and again there's no way to really correct that without a calibration device of your own. The grayscale remained decent with an average colour temperature of 6387K, being a small 2% out from our target, but caused by that drop in the blue channels shown in the middle graph. White point was slightly too warm again by 3% at 6324K, but overall this wasn't bad at all. The colour space of the screen was being nicely clamped now back close to the sRGB reference space with 96.1% coverage measured, but importantly this mode did cut back on the large overcoverage that we'd seen before in the wide gamut mode. This resulted in an overall reasonable colour accuracy for sRGB colours with a Delta E of 2.6 measured, although maybe this could have been slightly better. The more obvious issue with the sRGB mode is that low gamma that we talked about, so ideally you'd want to be able to calibrate the screen yourself to improve that, and then at the same time you'll be able to correct the colour accuracy further. Once the screen is calibrated, we got some excellent results of course. Here where it's been profiled within the native wide gamut mode, back to an sRGB colour space for colour aware applications. You can find our recommended settings and a link to our ICC profile in the description below. For gaming, the screen's got a 1 millisecond grey to grey response time spec for its so-called rapid IPS panel. The high pixel density from the 4K resolution offers a really sharp and highly detailed image, which is an ideal resolution for a screen of this size. The maximum refresh rate of the screen is 160Hz, although note that this is actually only available when running at the native 4K resolution, with the maximum being limited to 144Hz if you were to run at 1440p or 1080p resolution. We measured the screen first of all at its maximum 160Hz refresh rate in each of the 3 overdrive modes available in the menu. In the normal mode, there was an average 6.7 millisecond grey to grey response time, but with no overshoot at all. However, this wasn't really fast enough to keep up with that frame rate of the screen, with only a 47% refresh rate compliance. So that leads to some additional smearing and blurring on moving content. If you move up to the fast mode, there are some noticeable visual improvements with better motion clarity and reduced blurring. We now had a 4.8 millisecond grey to grey response time and only some slight visible overshoot in a few transitions at this refresh rate. With the response times now being quite a lot better, we did now have an 83% refresh rate compliance, which was good, and the panel can now keep up much better with that 160Hz refresh rate. The maximum fastest mode reduced the overall response times a bit more, down to 3.6 milliseconds average, but it was at the expense of some obvious and noticeable overshoot in practice, with pale and dark halos being very easy to spot. The fast mode seemed to be the optimal then at this maximum refresh rate. Here's some pursuit camera photos as well, which capture the real-world perceived motion clarity of the screen at its maximum 160Hz refresh rate in each of those 3 overdrive modes so that you can compare. We then measured the screen during VRR situations using the fast overdrive mode. As the refresh rate reduces, the response times remain consistent at around 4.7 milliseconds grey to grey. But the problem with this is that the level of overshoot then increases quite noticeably as the refresh rate lowers. The level of overshoot is still reasonable at 120 Hz for instance, but by the time you reach down to around 100 Hz, the overshoot starts to become far more noticeable and you get some halos and trails on moving objects. This reaches high levels as well at the lower end of the refresh rate range, for instance at 60 Hz as shown here. This is quite common for an adaptive sync screen to be honest, as it's lacking the variable overdrive capability that a native G-Sync screen might have, which would be used to help control the response times and overshoot in these situations. In this case, by the time you get down to the lower refresh rates below about 100 Hz, you'd actually be better switching down to the normal overdrive mode, where all of the overshoot is then completely eliminated. Here we've taken measurements at 60 Hz, for example, comparing the fast overdrive mode to the normal mode. Unfortunately, this means that the screen does not offer a single overdrive mode experience for gaming, and you're probably going to need to set the overdrive mode to the appropriate level for your refresh rate, depending on what your system's achieving. So if you're consistently getting 100 to 160 Hz for VRR, or if you're going to play at a fixed high refresh rate without VRR, then stick to the fast mode because that's going to be optimal. If you're more regularly getting below 100 Hz, or you're using an input device with a fixed lower refresh rate, like an older gen games console for instance, then you're better off sticking with the normal mode where the overshoot is all eliminated. This does make the screen a little bit more of a pain to use though for gaming situations than a screen which can offer you that single overdrive mode experience. There's super low input lag from this screen as well, even at lower refresh rates like 60 Hz. We measured only a 1.43 milliseconds total lag at 160 Hz, so with around 1.2 milliseconds of that accounted for by the pixel response times, that leaves us with a very small 0.23 milliseconds of signal processing lag. So that's excellent, and it should make the screen suitable for all kinds of different gaming. MSI also provide a motion blur reduction mode via their MPRT setting. So this can be enabled natively at supported refresh rates of 120 Hz, 144 Hz and 160 Hz. Although the user manual also says that it can operate at anything above 85 Hz. You can actually also use this feature at the same time as VRR on the screen, which is still pretty rare in the monitor market. So that's a nice additional feature if you like these kind of modes. Once it's enabled, you do lose access to the brightness control in the on-screen menu though. We measured a luminance of 125 nits in this mode, so that's reasonable, but it might be too dark for some users. You also lose access to the response time setting, although in our testing the screen did now deliver a single overdrive mode performance, but it seemed to be replicating what was equivalent to the normal mode when this was turned off. We confirmed that the strobing of the backlight operates in sync with the refresh rate, so in this example shown it strobes at 160 Hz. The motion clarity is reasonable with this mode enabled, although you do get a fair amount of strobe crosstalk, especially in the upper and lower regions of the screen. The central region is the clearest, so the strobe timing is well configured at least, and the tracking of moving objects across the screen becomes easier and clearer. It's possibly a useful mode though, of course, to some gamers who like blur reduction backlights, especially with that ability to use it at the same time as VRR. There's also some mid-tier HDR capabilities here, with the screen meeting the VESA Display HDR 600 certification level. So that's going to offer you some basic edge-lit local dimming, support for 10-bit color depth and a wide color gamut covering at least 95% of the DCI P3 color space. It can also deliver a peak brightness spec of 600 nits. So when you enable an HDR input source, most of the screen settings become locked and the local dimming feature is automatically enabled. The HDR mode is accurate in many ways, but seems to be let down by the PQ tracking. If you look at the graph on the right hand side here, you can see that the brightness is too bright for black, and this causes raised blacks unfortunately in practice. In fact, even though the brightness could reach a lot higher in HDR mode, up to around 750 nits in fact, we never really improved the overall contrast ratio on the panel, as the blacks were raised quite a lot, which was a problem. There's also quite high levels of blooming and halos on the screen because of the low number of local dimming zones, so it's certainly not going to compete with modern mini LED backlights or OLED panels when it comes to HDR black depth and contrast. The colour temp and white point were overall good though, with a 6369K white point being only 2% out from our target of D65. This resulted in a good overall grayscale accuracy as well, with 1.5 delta E measured. Peak brightness was actually pretty good at around 700 nits and sustaining that for all window sizes, even for a full screen white window. This was a reasonable amount above the 600 nits that we expected from the spec, so you do at least get some nice bright images in HDR mode. Colour accuracy was also very good in HDR mode, with an average delta E of 1.1 measured, if we ignore the 100% RGB colours of the Rec 2020 colour space that the panel can't fully reach anyway. Apart from the raised blacks, the overall HDR setup was actually very decent. The MSI MAG 323 UPF is also a competitively priced screen for a 32-inch 4K 160Hz model. It's available at a normal retail price of $699 at the time of this video, although you'll often find it even cheaper still than that. We'll leave links in the description below so you can check out availability and pricing for your region, of course, but this does make it around $300 cheaper than popular competing models like the Asus ROG Swift PG32UQR, for instance, or around $230 less than their ROG Strix XG32UQ. The pricing does make it an attractive option for sure, given the excellent combination of a larger screen size, 4K resolution and that high refresh rate. If you're after a gaming screen in a different size or a different technology perhaps, check out our regularly updated recommendations guide as well, which is linked in the description below. If you want to stay up to date on other monitor news, reviews and content, please do hit the subscribe button as well to stay up to date. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.